Okay, so thank you all for joining us. We have been covering this topic at Velocity since Santa Clara in the spring. A lot of people have been talking about this in large part in response to a post that John Willis wrote, who's sitting right there. And it's so important that we've been doing this at every conference, and we think it's incredibly critical that we continue to talk about this. So what we're doing here today is I've got a panel of fabulous people here who have experiences in varying shapes and sizes with the topic of burnout in tech. What I want to do before we actually open up this as a conversation amongst these folks, and then with you all as well, I hope, is I want to tee the subject up with a little bit of background and research. So in Santa Clara, we were incredibly fortunate to have pretty much the preeminent researcher on burnout across any industry present at the start of the session. Her name is Christina Maslach. And she was kind and generous enough to come and give a smaller presentation on the front of the panel that we had there. And what I've done is essentially taken some of the pieces from her presentation, and I want to talk through this just a little bit because it's incredibly important that we have a shared common understanding of what we mean when we say burnout, lest it become folklore or a comparison of subjective experiences. And the nice thing about that is that research has done just that. So she has decades of research into burnout in a variety of different industries, especially in caring industries. So healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, hospice workers, who tend to have a very high level of burnout. So I'm going to share some of the research of what she found and talk about the description that she uses for burnout and a framework for some of the factors so that we can use that, hopefully, in our conversation here. So the definition that Christina Maslach provides is of burnout is a situation in which workers are overwhelmed, unable to cope, unmotivated, and display negative attitudes and poor performance. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Raise a hand. Okay, so she's kind of spot on with that, which is a good start. And there were from her research, there were 3 hallmarks of this phenomenon that they identified through a large body of work. So one of which is exhaustion, which is essentially individual personal stress, cynicism, which is a negative response to the job, and professional inefficiency, inefficacy. Oh, that's one of the worst words ever. Which is essentially a negative self-evaluation. So that's the triad of hallmarks of burnout in an individual. But the actual phenomenon it's a stress-related phenomenon. It's a prolonged response to chronic interpersonal stress on the job. And she's done so much research and work on this. She actually has an index. So it's the Maslow Burnout Index. You can look that up. It's the MBI. John, I know, has been actually working to try to do some research using that index.
The IT-Sec people did one for about 1,000 people in the IT-Sec job format.
Yep.
And it's exactly, they've got really good statistics on it too.
Yeah, so IT-Sec, that's at RSA that was presented?
It was one of those, I can push the presentation.
Yeah, we can put and we can add stuff to the notes on this afterwards.
MBI,
using the Maslow Burnout Index. So, and I think it's obvious, but I do want to talk about why we care about this. I think we care about this as individuals because we care about the people that we work with. But there are larger social and organizational and business reasons that we care about this as well. And she lays out 6 of them. I'm just going to list them off, not talk too much about them. But poor quality of work, low morale, absenteeism, turnover, health problems, depression, which can, at times, lead to suicide, and family problems. How many people here are hiring? How easy is it to hire people right now? How expensive is it to hire people right now? All of the money. So there are a variety of factors, social, economic, business, why this is critical. So I want to talk about the 6 strategic areas that she talks about in terms of it's a misfit fundamentally between the individual and their job. And I think we'll get into this when we talk about this. There is often the common perception that burnout is the function of overwork and an organization that's just screwing you over. And that can happen, but it is fundamentally about this misfit between what is happening with the organization and what is happening with the individual. And she has 6 strategic areas where you can find these misfit. These are not in order of importance, but the first one is what people mostly think of. It's actually more the other ones, but I'll get this one out of the way, which is workload. It's that the demands are too high, the resources are too low. It is probably the best predictor of that one piece, which is exhaustion. But the other 5 that I'm going to go through now are really actually the bigger contributors. So control, sense of control over your job. Do you have choices over what you do? Or do you exist in a state of chaos? Or do you have a say and some autonomy and a feeling that you have some control over what you do in your work? Reward. Do you receive recognition? Do you have intrinsic reward for the work that you do? Do you feel that you are rewarded by the work you do and that you are recognized for the work that you do? Community, the social relationships you have at work. And that may be the people on your team, that may be you and your boss, that might be vendors that you interact with on a regular basis. It's a community being a very large group there. Are those good, supporting, trustworthy relationships? Or is there unresolved conflict, unhealthy competition, no information sharing? Is it, as she describes it, socially toxic? Last 2, fairness. Do you feel that you work in an environment that is fair? If not, this is a big contributor to people feeling cynical, which is another one of those 3 hallmarks. And lastly are values. Do you share the values of the organization that you work for? Or are there conflicts that can lead to essentially a sense of erosion of your own personal worth? So the more mismatches there are between that job environment and the person, the more likely you have the preconditions for burnout. So that's setting the stage. And so we can use those as reference points and things to work back to. And so I'm going to leave that there. You can actually find her presentation if you look for the Velocity Santa Clara 2015 video compilation. That particular video is free on our site. Anyone can go and look at it and see her work. She also has a couple of books out, one of them very specifically on the topic of burnout more recently in the research she's done in the healthcare industry. Okay, so now to the panel. I am joined by 4 folks from varying places and industries and points in life. Next to me is Patrick Debois. If you've ever heard the word DevOps, you might know who he is. Next to me is Lorna Jane. And she actually, you already spoke yet. You spoke at OSCON, yes?
I spoke at OSCON. I'm speaking tomorrow.
You're speaking tomorrow, okay. And then to my right of her is Lindsay Holmwood, and he actually just spoke this morning about language and blame in organizations, so he has some opinions about these things. And then to his right is Samantha Quiñones, who also has already spoken, did a tutorial yesterday. These are people who work and live and breathe in this industry day in and day out. So actually what I want to kick off by asking, did the things that I described, do those resonate with you, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think one of the first words that struck me when you were doing the explanation was health care, and the word care. So if you care about your job and you do things, that's what gives you energy, but also drains your energy. And I can relate to the burnout in general, but in my case, and I'm going to explain that, everything was positive. So I had no external stress. There was no bad work situations, but everything was positive impulse. So there was a complete overload of trying to do everything that was positive. So I don't know if that qualifies as burnout, but typically burnout is put only in the perspective that somebody puts a pressure or the external puts a pressure on you. Right. And I think in my case, it was more that I put my personal stress on myself.
So it's about the mismatch. Mm-hmm. And there is actually some other research. John gave me some PDFs at lunch. Just before lunch. There's some really interesting. It was before lunch. There's some interesting research around. This isn't actually Maslach, but colleagues and folks in the same area around this perfectionistic impulse and the role of that in contributing to burnout. And yes, that is very much a thing. And again, that paper, which of course we can share with you all as well, shares some tools and resources for how do you deal with that. But that's a newer line of research, I'd say. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I relate to that really clearly. The mismatch, and also that a lot of it can come from inside you. It can be that you don't feel rewarded by what you do, and I think that plays back to the control issues that we've already mentioned. I also think that sometimes you can feel like you are not achieving, and it's because you don't feel like what you do is good enough. Maybe not perfectionist, but certainly on a personal level, I am guilty of taking on too much. I have had experiences with burnout. I was freelance for a while. I think I was probably quite a successful consultant, but I never believed that I was. And that contributed to my kind of anxiety. I now work part-time and can't seem to come to terms with how much time is left. I have about 4 part-time jobs and it just doesn't add up, so I'm kind of back where I started. So it's not always just work or just a workload. It can be, like you say, too much of a good thing, too many good opportunities. And I think because we are enablers, we want to facilitate people, we try and do everything. I have a strong open source background, and we do see contributor burnout as well as colleague burnout.
And that's that negative self evaluation piece of that efficacy or inefficacy, a sense of inefficacy, even when you're doing so much, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think the bit that struck me the most was the recognition of all the effort that you're putting in. One interesting thing there, I think, is that people who have a lot of sort of intrinsic motivation, they're also the sort of people that need the most amount of positive feedback about the work that they're doing. And you don't need to provide a lot. That's the funny thing about it. Like, you just provide just enough, and because they're intrinsically motivated, it's adding fuel to that fire that burns within them, and it's enough to just like kickstart it. And it's. I come from I've been in a management and leadership position for the last 5 years, and the thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that the people that I work with are happy, and they are happy and are sustainably happy as well. So just that little push. Hey, you're doing a fantastic job. Keep going. If you have any problems, come get me. But you're doing a great job. That's all that you need, especially with high-performance individuals, people that you're going to find in this sort of room.
I can mirror the experiences, my own experience with burnout. I actually ended up leaving the industry for several years. After that was after working for a company for 10 years, in various IT roles. But for me, I got locked into this cycle of putting these expectations on myself, and then that sort of built into this place can't function without me, which is a negatively reinforcing cycle, something that reinforces itself, because the more you're convinced this place can't operate without me, the more you take on, the more you kind of hide from people who could be taking on some of that burden, and it just builds and builds and builds on itself. And then before you realize it, you've come to this point where you've stopped caring, you've checked out, you're depressed, you're exhausted, and there's no place to go at that point because you've painted yourself into a corner. And in the time that I took off from working, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about what pushed me to that point, and trying to process it. And it was a long time in realizing that it wasn't really the job, it wasn't the company that I was working for that did this to me. They certainly didn't help as much as maybe they could have, but I really did it to myself because I wasn't paying attention to my own internal states. I was in that. And I think maybe a lot of younger people have this feeling of like, I'm invincible, I can go forever, I can take on all of the work and just work and work and work and work and work, and it, that doesn't last forever. So there definitely a lot of this comes from inside and the expectations that we put on ourselves.
So, I didn't say this at the beginning, but one of the things I wanted to make sure we focus on, along with sharing stories and relating to this, is some sense of practical advice and outcomes from this. So it is good for us to share stories and commune on what this means to us. But I think the biggest piece about talking about the mismatch is first of all, understanding two things to understand is, one, when you're seeing burnout in yourself or a colleague, how do you recognize that? How do you know that might be happening? But upstream of that, what things can we be aware of? Can we be working on in organizations? Can we be having our organizations help the organization change to even get some of those upstream things out of the way so that you're not at that, diagnosing the problem in yourself or another person. So in terms of, sort of focusing on that, so you mentioned that everything was fine in the sense of the work in the organization, and same thing, Samantha. So this is not that case where people think of it's something being done to you. And I'm really glad you phrased it that way, because that is commonly the view. And then the answer is, well, just leave, right?
Yeah.
Just leave. You go someplace else. First of all, that's ridiculous. That everybody doesn't have that choice necessarily, and that also again presumes that it's not a mismatch. It's just something being done to you, and then therefore your only option is to go. So in the sense of it was happening from you. How did you? What happened that you decided? What was you said you left.
I left. Yeah, I walked into my boss's office one day and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. I gave 2 weeks notice. I wasn't a complete jerk, but I said I can't do this. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was like, well, maybe I'll write. I do some like dog training, like in my spare time. Like, I'm going to try and start a business like training dogs, which doesn't pay as well as being an engineer, by the way. Which ironically is how I came back into the industry. I had family situation change, and I needed to earn more money to take care of my family. But yeah, I mean, it had just. I mean, but it wasn't. I can look at that one event, like me, like leaving my job and quitting, but it had been coming for maybe 2-3 years leading up to that point, where I had lost my engagement. I had no interest in the goals of the company, the goals of my group. I was phoning it in. I mean, like really toward the end, I was probably stealing paychecks. Like I was really just there. And when you've been at a company for 10 years, like no one's going to just like shove you out the door. Like you've built up some cred, I guess, with the company over time. So, looking at other people, and now that I've come back into the industry in more of a senior position where I'm mentoring and leading teams, I'm trying to look for these signs in people that I work with that their interest is waning. And it can be simple things like they're not collaborating in meetings as much. They're not coming up with ideas. They're just taking whatever tickets get assigned to them in Jira, and they may be doing a fine enough job at it, but they're just not there. I think there are a lot of signs that you can look out for in your teammates that something is a little bit off, especially if it's a marked. It's like they always talk about with like moles on your skin. Like it's not the mole isn't the problem. It's when it changes all of a sudden. Like when somebody just changes their behavior suddenly. It's something to be concerned about.
I think looking out for other people in the teams is a really key point, because it's a social responsibility that we have to all the other people that we work with. You tend to find that when you're in that position where you are burnt out, you simply just don't have the perspective to be able to identify that that's even happening to you in the first place. So it's why it's so important to have that strong network of peers around you to be able to, and routinely checking in with them and being able to say, hey, well, then being able to say to you, hey, there's a problem, and let's work on a way that we can actually try and fix it together.
It's not the same thing as depression. They are separable. They often can co-occur. But I feel like that piece of it, your inability to understand what is going on, is so terrifyingly familiar to depression that I mean that's awful in a sound, but it's almost like people can relate to that to a certain degree. And if you have any relationship with that, and it's almost more talked about in a way now than burnout is, you at least have some internal monologue or some words and tools already, to use there, like you said. And the checking in on burnout is really in many ways not unlike that. I think you were about to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really relate to that about the idea of depression and also burnout are when weird things happen to you because your brain chemistry went wrong. We're smart. Almost by definition, people in our industry are smart. We work with smart people. It makes them high functioning in the event of depression and in the event of burnout. I have definitely experienced both and left jobs over at least one of those. And once kind of the clouds have cleared, it's like a bad memory. You can't really appreciate what's happening. And when you're in the moment, you definitely can't. We come dependent upon the people around us. Our colleagues, of course. I'm married to a geek, so to some extent each other. looking out for those kinds of things, realizing that, so I do more development than ops, so we're quite office hours based, which is nice because it's quite regular. When you notice that there's a colleague who isn't remembering that they're delighted by technology and isn't playing with strange things at the weekends, for me that's an alarm bell, because those are the kinds of people that I work with and want to work with, and if they're losing that I try to watch for it and try to ask why.
I mean, the fire and the fire station is suicide, right? And,
Yeah.
and those, the scenarios there are no signs. In fact, the people, to your point, the intrinsic people, they look like they're killing it.
Yeah.
Word. They look like they're doing, they're excited, and they're the ones that we have a hard time figuring out, and when they happen, we lose our mind. And again, another pet phrase. But the thing is, one of the things I think is the being vulnerable. That's been a constant since I've written the article. Everybody I've talked about, we go looking, we're not going to see it.
Yeah.
What we do when we see it is when we make ourselves vulnerable to other people in any way, where they come to us and they feel like they can confide in you with something that is awfully scary.
Well, I think that's a really good point because, for example, if one of the mismatches in the organization is trust, that person has a low trust, value. Yeah, do we have another one? We only have this one? Okay, yeah, we'll pass it around. Sorry. So, I mean, John is basically saying that the suicide situation, you don't see that coming, and there's not this classic like Lifetime movie build up to this dramatic conclusion. That's not how it works. And so then the piece of like, if you just go ask somebody, hey, I noticed you're not feeling great, or what's wrong, you might not get an accurate or true or sort of open answer to that. Especially, it very much depends on your relationship. But I mean, if that mismatch is on the trust piece in the organization, that's a hard hill to climb.
They also may not know.
Yeah.
They may not understand.
Yeah.
Especially the driven people, they think they are failing and they are trying harder, and yes, eventually they implode. And sometimes I don't think they see it coming.
I think it's one of the dangers is that the only person who can really do something about it is yourself. And if you're not convinced that there's a problem, it's going to be really hard.
So I would counter that though, because if you look at it from the mismatch perspective, it's not entirely on you to solve that problem, right? So you can have solutions on the individual side, which we can talk more about too. But
Sure.
But if an organization is not watching out for you, that is a part of the problem. But that is not to say that an organization couldn't help as well. And
That's in
looking
the
at
case if it's put on you. The other one is internal. If you don't see it internally, you can't
Right.
solve it
Right.
yourself. But
and so, I mean, I think, Etsy is trying to start having a happiness survey. And so the questions are, what out of that research that Maslach and crew are doing can organizations do? And the first thing I think they can do is they can check in with their people in a serious, I don't want to say data-driven because that sounds detached, but in a very serious, repeatable, deep kind of way. I mean, even if you're getting a top level number and you're watching that, it also suggests to the people who work for you that you care about that stuff and you want to embrace it and understand it and see how it's doing. So
one of the policies I changed in the company I worked is that they used to pile up all the overtime and then take it for a holiday, like save it. And now we have a rule that whenever they have overtime, they have to like take downtime within a certain period immediately after when they had a peak. Because it doesn't make sense to pile it up. It has to be like peaks like in sports. You just go up and down. If you train for running faster, you don't run the same speed all the time. You go a bit faster and slower, and that's how you train. And I think that's one of the things you can do is, this is a policy. You're not allowed to pile your extra time.
Folks are in better places now, it sounds like. So do you feel like you're seeing things that organizations are doing that are helpful on this front?
I mean, yeah, I do. And having, coming back into the industry, obviously, I went to therapy while I was not working in the industry. coming back in, I was very much looking for a company that would support, was supportive of its people, and I think that it's very, very possible, as long as the buy-in starts at the very, very top, and it has to be part of the company's culture to not just employ people and get the best work out of them, but to also take care of them. And I won't say it's specific to our industry, but our industry is a little bit weird in that I don't know many, if any, people in this industry who put in a 35 or 40-hour work week and then, go sailing, because they know that's the time they do work. So we work full time, but most of us are working on open source projects or working on personal projects or a startup. Or, I don't do a lot of open source, but this is, I think, the 20-something conference that I'm speaking at this year. And a lot of work. I spend a lot of my free time preparing presentations and doing research and stuff like that. So, and even where I'm coming from, where I'm very, very cognizant of the amount of time, like I put in my day's work and I turn off my laptop and I have downtime afterward. I set aside time to work on additional projects. Our industry is not like a 9-to-5 industry. So it's really important for the people at the very top of the companies to drive this culture of, we know you're not going to put in your 35 and 40 hours and go home, but we're going to support you. We're going to make sure that you're taking time off, that you're taking downtime, that you're spending some of the time that you are at work working on personal enrichment, things that make it easier for you to cope with problems. I think that. And I think that it needs to start at the top, but it needs to work all the way down. Like if you're a senior engineer, but an individual contributor, like you have this amazing opportunity to help teach more junior people in your organization, not just the intricacies of whatever it is that you do, whether you're in DevOps or you're an engineer, but also how to teach them how to cope and thrive in this industry. That's some of the stuff some of the skills that you've learned over your years, in this world. I think it's really important, and a good company culture drives that.
Well, I think it's also interesting the about how your behavior sends signals to other people, right? So, are you answering emails at 1 a.m? Are you answering emails while you're on vacation? Are you right? You send, and people notice those things, right? And so those are signals that you send, even if you're a manager, absolutely, but even if you're not, right? And those are things that we can be aware of and talk to our managers and our teams about as well. Because if you have one person who's doing that, everyone else either one person's like really annoyed because that's just stupid, or someone else is like, well, I'm not sending emails at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like, should I be sending emails at 1 o'clock in the morning? I mean, like if I don't manage an engineering team, but if you're on my team and you've gone on vacation, you send me an email, I'm going to go down and have somebody turn off your access. Like, just full stop. That's not okay. But if you don't have people modeling that same behavior around you, if anyone can't tell, I'm a parent. Then you can actually be seeding that kind of behavior, very unwittingly, I think.
Yeah, and in management positions, that's something that I'm particularly acutely aware of. So, like, if there's, there'll always be deadlines, something that you hit that you're working towards, and people are going to have to put in extra effort. So, in a case where maybe it's just something that, like, I'm sort of being in a management position, I'm a member of 2 teams, right? I'm a member of the team that I'm leading, but I'm also a member of a larger management team. So, say if I'm working on some sort of project or deliverable for that bigger picture management team, and I'm online, other people within the team will take notice of that very, very quickly. And I've been in situations where, after doing it for like 2 or 3 days, working in the evening, there'll be like slow trickle of more and more people in the team spending time in HipChat or Slack or whatever. And then it's like, oh crap, like I am sending these very, very subtle signals to other people that there's this expectation that, if I'm working at night, then maybe you should be working at night as well. And so the simplest thing to do there is just like, once you recognize that that's happening, you just call out and say, hey, I'm doing this because there's a crunch time and I'm working towards this thing, but as soon as I'm done, that's going to be the end of it. In fact, if you come online, I'm going to know, and I'm going to have a chat to you about it. So you've got to be in a leadership position. You've got to be very forceful about that, because it's about maintaining the sustainability of the energy levels of the people within your team, right? And if you're burning extra energy by working into the night, then you're not going to have enough energy the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right?
And it's the piece of the workload argument again as well. It's not that anyone probably in this industry isn't going to have ebbs and flows. Some of them very well known. If you're in retail, you know what those are. If you have a certain product cycle or whatever it is, those are at least known things. And like what you hope is that the peaks aren't these unexpected crises that happen all the time. That's a first a really bad sign. But if you have these peaks and you know that, and there's a culture of trust and sharing, and the workload goes up when it goes up and it goes back down, and then there's reward and recognition, like that's okay. And especially for intrinsically motivated, high, functioning people. But that has to be on the table, I think, as a big piece of that. So, should we take a question? I think we should take a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who has a question in the audience? Yeah, hand up in the green there. I have the microphone, which is no problem, so just shout it and I'll repeat it.
We have increasingly seen a decrease in the value placed on the HR department. How do you provide training to managers so that the lessons learned from folks who've been in this industry for a long time, taking care of people, and transfer that knowledge to the managers who are increasingly responsible for things that they don't really know how to do?
So essentially, to paraphrase, let me know if I got this wrong, most HR departments aren't really focusing on these kinds of things anymore, and it lies much more heavily on managers who have not been trained in this stuff. They have no experience with it. They don't know what to do. Yes? How do we help those people out is what you're asking. Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
I have an opinion. I hate the term human resources, but I really feel that role in a company is important. It's not that managers are not the right people to help their team, and it's not that they can't certainly be given the proper training. I think there's a tremendous amount of value of having somebody to turn to in your organization who is not in your sphere of judgment, right? It's very intimidating to go to your manager and say, I have this personal problem that I need to deal with. Going to somebody who's somebody who's like not in your everyday life is much easier. It's the same reason that going to speak to a therapist is so much more effective than trying to speak to a friend of yours about personal problems. You don't have this context, right? I think it's like I really feel like managers should be trained in identifying mental health issues and burnout issues. I think it's really very important, but I don't like the trend of sort of getting rid of human resources departments, as horrifying as that name is.
Well, and I work in a company which, so I work part-time for a company which has maybe 9 people if we were all going to be in the same place at the same time, which we're not because we're distributed. And guess what? We don't have an HR department. Like, it's probably technically the office manager or something. Like, we don't have a structure for that, and we couldn't possibly justify it. Sure. But exactly as Samantha says, in that case, I am a tech lead and I don't get any support at all on this. And I think there should be training courses. I'm kind of constantly on the lookout for resources, but I haven't really found a community to share those with. And I think those are the kinds of solutions that maybe we could be looking for to help each other, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess one of the other, there's another cognitive bias at play here as well, which is the bystander effect, which is the more people that are witness to something bad happening, the less likely people are going to do something about it. So you counter that by recognizing that you're actually in the middle of the bystander effect, and you stand up and you say, hey, we need to do something about this there. So when you have that diffusion of HR responsibility across the org structure, that's all well and good. Like, maybe that's a more efficient way to do stuff within your organization. That's totally cool. But doing that without giving additional training and mentoring to the people that are meant to be performing those duties, that's socially irresponsible.
So I don't think we actually gave you any how to do that. I think what everyone is acknowledging with you is that is a problem, and there aren't a lot of good resources or tools right now for that. I think especially if you're in a company that is not handling that well and you're a single individual, I think that can be challenging. You guys are doing some interesting stuff around this. Do you want to chime in at all? Well, around sort of managers and HR and how your HR is structured and yeah.
I think that there is a lot of value in, and I think size is a very important part. One of the things that we've been doing is putting effort at Etsy. Sorry, I work at Etsy. Is management training, leadership training. We have a leadership and development team, and our HR people are awesome. And just from a pure, I mean absolute bare bones capitalist standpoint, not investing that is bad business. It's actually awful. In fact, if any of you are competitors, keep doing what you're doing. Because Etsy will beat you at this. But management training, I think, is the thing that that you can. I mean, there are sources of people who are doing it themselves and educating themselves. There are people who are addicted to self-motivated to go read books, and even if your company can't do it, that doesn't mean that you can't sort of reach out and look for resources.
I have a question for you. Would you guys open source your management stuff? Or is it your secret sauce? I'm thinking of Anna's talk this morning. So now we've got thousands of tech organizations all over the world trying to recreate, if they're even trying, their solution to this problem. So can we have like burnout training as a service? You know what I mean, though.
Netflix Successful HR, Patty McCord is not there anymore. You want to watch an amazing video? One of the greatest HR persons on the planet, Patty McCord. The title was Chief Talent Officer.
I just feel like there's a lot of institutional knowledge within companies in places that are doing this better that's not getting out.
Yeah, but
So I would say, there's a couple of things. So I think that's fine. I think that's actually a good idea. But as long as you make that, would you open source your solution? Make that plural, solutions. But again, most of the companies that at least want to invest in that, in this sort of thing, they're not inventing it themselves. We're looking to books like Crucial Conversations. We are looking to Michael Lopp's books. We are looking to Turn the Ship Around, and any number of different. Lindsay Holmwood wrote an awesome blog post about it, and
But
so
that was just packaging at that point. Like,
yeah,
packaging.
Yeah,
If you've looked at any of the stuff that I've actually read,
Yeah.
it's just targeting a very particular audience, right?
exactly, and that's what synthesis has as a power. Turns out this crowd knows about packaging.
So the problem I have with that is the people who are willing to do the work already care about this, right? And so what do you do with the people who aren't willing to do that much work? They're not as curious as you. There's hundreds of thousands of people working at these companies where somebody needs this information, and the people working there aren't going to go off and do all the work you're doing. Like, how do we get that to them?
So, I don't know if it's completely the same, but we're a small company as well. We don't have an HR department, but we have an HR company that we can call, whether it's on financial, like work-related stuff. And occasionally I get pings from them on subjects that I don't know. So I can see it's their role to actually ping me like, hey, have you thought about this? Or maybe there's something that you can look on that. I don't expect them to be the responsible for my problem. It's not just the HR department, their problem that there's burnout has to be embedded everywhere, but it has to be like a lifeline and somebody hinting at you or external feedback. And that's the way I think, even though we don't have like anything in place, it's somebody who's willing to ping me and say, whether it's everything with HR, have you thought about this? And that's at least the trigger you get. So.
And there's a site, burnout.io, which is sort of trying to collect resources and information. It's still, I think, fairly loosely done, but there's a possibility there. I thought I saw a question over here somewhere, maybe. Was there a hand up over here? Yeah.
Yeah. I just realized that I'm burned out. What am I supposed to do now?
What's your name?
Yurai.
Say it again.
Yurai.
Yurai just said he just realized he's burned out. Now what? What do you think?
I think the temptation is to like quit your job or walk away from your open source projects, and especially for things that are not your main source of income, you have to be prepared to walk away. No matter if you're the core maintainer and the world will end without you. If it's not how you pay your bills, you have to be prepared to walk away. From experience, that's hard. I guess you'll always live with the guilt, but it's the right thing. If it's work-related, then if you just quit and change jobs, you will take those victim habits with you. And you will probably repeat those patterns. I know I did across a lot of jobs, really. I left a lot of jobs and kind of recreated the situation in the next job a few times. It's about remembering to respect yourself and perhaps looking for more support and feedback. I think the guy said this already about finding someone who will reward you and let you know that you are doing okay, or honestly let you know if you're not, so that you don't have to be the judge of that and it doesn't kind of spiral inside your head. I'm sure there's other advice.
I'm a big fan of therapy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
Can we just... Can we please stop thinking that therapy is, first of all, a last resort, second of all, a thing that only people who are really screwed up go and do, and just third of all, something we shouldn't talk about. Like, I was a brain scientist once upon a time, and I would tell people, like, if your heart has a hole in it, you go to a doctor who's really good at hearts and try to fix the hole in it. If something is not working in terms of your psychology and your thought processes and your feelings, that's what those people do and what they specialize in, and it is genius that they exist.
If you're running out of system resources, you don't wait till you're over the 95% percentile before you do anything about it. That's the same for your mental health as well. You can get therapy when you start to realize the first alerts are going off. That's a good time.
Or actually, you could just go to therapy, just in general.
We've run about 5 or 6 open spaces on burnout and DevOps days over the last year. And a book that I read many years ago that I just was not going to recommend, a book on other people's problems, and it's come up at least 5 times since, and now I do recommend it. It's called Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, by Dr. Burns.
Yeah, Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, Dr. Burns.
Before I was brave enough to tell other people that I used that book about 15 years ago.
So I don't know if that helps. Whatever resources you have at hand where you work, if not, find them elsewhere. It's like at least you're at the point of realizing it. That's
start having a conversation with your manager, right? Because it's in your manager's best interest to look out for your welfare. If they, hopefully it's in their best interest, right? But even just from a raw capitalist perspective, like John was talking about, let's say that you're burnt out and the organization doesn't provide the necessary assistance to help you get better. And make the way that you work more sustainable, then you're going to leave, right? That's just the truth of the matter, right? But there are very indirect economic costs to people leaving from the organization, right? You have a loss of institutional knowledge. There's the other people in your team that are picking up the additional work that you were previously doing. There's the cost of hiring and training new people, right? So if you talk to your boss and you don't get any sort of help or feedback, just slowly push them in that direction. That hey, there are some bigger picture costs that you're perhaps not thinking about then.
Yeah, I mean, all of us represent large investments, that our companies have made, and hopefully we work for people who appreciate that, and hopefully your management understands not only what you bring to them, but how much they've put into you, and they want to sort of honor that commitment that they've made to you.
So we're pretty much out of time. So I wanted to wrap up by saying please go look up and read about Christina Maslach's work. You can look into some of the things that John had mentioned. I'll try to get notes on the page for this particular presentation so people can find them. But I think the biggest other thing that we can do as a community to prevent burnout is to not leave this room and then not go talk to people about this. Take this back to your organization, to your teams, to your management. Tell them about it. Tell them it's important. Raise the awareness of this. Not talking about seemingly bad things just makes more bad things happen. So that's what I want to leave everyone with.